Vibha, members of NISTADS and Vibha family, and distinguished guests. I welcome you all to today's dialogue exchange session on Nataraja, a confluence of arts and science. It's a great privilege for me to introduce the luminary speakers of today's session. We have with us Dr. Anil Kakodkar. It is very difficult to cite his accomplishments in a very limited words, but I will try my best. Dr. Kakodkar is a renowned Indian nuclear physicist and mechanical engineer. He was the chairman of Atomic Energy Commission of India and secretary to the Government of India. He was the director of Bhabha Atomic Research Center. He has been awarded all the three Padma Awards, Padma Shri, Padma Bhushan, and the India's second highest civilian honor, Padma Vibhushan, in 2009. Dr. Kakodkar has worked for the development of the atomic energy program in India throughout his professional life. Taking into account our limited resources on uranium, his focus has been to make India self-reliant on thorium, which is abundantly present in India as a fuel for nuclear energy. He has created a roadmap for shaping the third stage of India's nuclear power program, not only for electricity, but also as a primary source for other forms of energy use. A number of new technology areas such as accelerator-driven systems, high-temperature reactors, materials and recycle technology have been nucleated for this purpose. He continues to be actively involved in programs related to augmentation of thorium utilization in our nuclear program and for the development of non-fossil primary energy sources for meeting our overall energy needs. Undeterred by the restrictions imposed by the international community, he succeeded in developing various systems for pressurized heavy water reactor, in building the Dhruva reactor, starting from the conceptual stage, and in rehabilitation of Madras Atomic Power Station units. Dr. Kakodkar has been a key contributor to India's strategic program. He was amongst the chosen few involved in the first successful peaceful nuclear explosion at Pokhran, experiment that India conducted in 1974. And later he played a key role in the series of successful nuclear tests conducted during 1998, again at Pokhran. India also demonstrated nuclear submarine powerful technology under his leadership. With these few words, I welcome you, sir, to this dialogue exchange program in today's session.
Thank you. Thank you.
Today we have with us another distinguished guest, Professor Sharda Srinivasan, professor at the National Institute of Advanced Studies, NIAS, Bangalore. She has made pioneering contributions to the study of archaeology and history of art from the perspective of exploring engineering applications in this discipline. She has worked on artifacts in the Government Museum, Chennai, British Museum, Victoria and Albert Museum, London, and Archaeological Survey of India. Professor Sharda Srinivasan is a fellow of Royal Asiatic Society of Great Britain and World Academy of Arts and Science. She has several awards and honors to his credit. To name a few, Dr. Kalpana Chawla Young Women Scientist Award, Malti B. Nagar Ethno-Archaeology Award, the Flinders Petrie Medal from University of London, British Chevening Scholarship, Forbes Research Associate at Department of Scientific Research and Conservation, and so on. She has been a co-recipient of several awards from UK, Canada, and United States. I am pleased to share that last year she received the Padma Shri, the fourth highest civilian award from Government of India in archaeology. It's a matter of great achievement for all of us. She is first author of the book India's Legendary Wood Steel and contributing author to Ecstasy of Classical Art and co-editor of Digital Hampi on digital exploration into the art and architecture of Hampi. She has also been an accomplished exponent of the classical dance form of Bharatanatyam and has given numerous lecture demonstrations such as on the artistic and scientific perspective on the Chola Nataraja bronze at international museums such as Royal Academy of Arts London, with a photo exhibition of the theme at Space City, uh, uh, Toulouse, apart from national venues. So I think we have the two resource persons, two distinguished guests, which have been very, very closely related to this Nataraja. In one way or the other, I will be citing that. Today we have organized this dialogue exchange program to celebrate a very special day. On this very day in 2004, Government of India gifted a 2-meter bronze statue of Nataraja, symbolizing Shiva's cosmic dance of creation and destruction to CERN, the European Organization of Nuclear Research, Geneva, to celebrate its long association with CERN dating back to 1960. The statue was unveiled by the Director General CERN, Dr. Robert Amer, His Excellency Mr. K.M. Chandrasekhar, Ambassador WTO Geneva, and none other than Dr. Anil Kakodkar, then Chairman of Atomic Energy Commission and Secretary Department of Atomic Energy, India. The antique finished statue was made in India through lost wax technology. The statue is on permanent display in the square between buildings 39 and 40, a short distance from the main building. One might wonder that how a Hindu god got a place in research institution like CERN. How is this dancing Nataraja sculpture related to physics? What is the science behind it? But there is always a reason behind everything. Scientists are now getting deeper into ancient archives for their discoveries. They are turning towards the wisdom of India and are in continuous search for a hidden science. Shiva's cosmic dance symbolizes the interaction between the static and dynamic energy flow. Fritjof Capra, a physicist, system theorist, and deep ecologist, published an article in 1972, The Dance of Shiva, the Hindu View of Matter in the Light of Modern Physics. This article drew a parallel between Shiva's dance and the dance of subatomic particles. He published this work in the form of a book, The Tao of Physics, in 1975. With the similar thought, Government of India chose this as a gift to CERN, where subatomic particles are observed and analyzed by physicists. Dr. Anil Kakodkar had then said the Indian scientific community is part of the quest for understanding the universe. At CERN, a special plaque next to Nataraja explains the significance of metaphor with the several quotes from the Tao of Physics. The text of the plaque is, I will read only one, there are a couple of others also. Hundreds of years ago, Indian artists created visual images of dancing Shiva in a beautiful series of bronzes. In our time, physicists have used the most advanced technology to portray the patterns of cosmic dance. The metaphor of the cosmic dance thus unifies ancient mythology, religious art, and modern physics. With these words, I can say that Nataraja thus picturizes a classic example of integration of science and arts. With these words, I would like to welcome our distinguished speakers once again and the participants who have joined us. And I would like to hand over the platform to Shri Vivekanand Pai ji for the further discourse. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ranjana ji. Kakodkar ji, though Ranjana ji mentioned about Tao of Physics as the thought that inspired, actually, what was the thinking process that took us to this decision of gifting a Nataraja statue at CERN? And as a related question, what was our expectation and how did they receive this particular suggestion?
Well, that's an interesting story. India has been having a very strong and very comprehensive relationship with the programs at CERN. Indian scientists have been collaborating with CERN research right since early 60s. Then, CERN is a place where they have been exploring these subatomic particles, and the entire research around subatomic particles, which has been going on in a very comprehensive way. As a part of continuing that research, CERN started this project called Large Hadron Collider. It was located in the same tunnel, which is 28 kilometers, 27 kilometers in circumference, and it is several hundred meters below the Earth. In fact, this tunnel, though CERN is located in Geneva, the tunnel, part of it is in Swiss territory and part of it is in French territory. And there are several experiments inside the tunnel, and of course, there are laboratories in the CERN center. So, as I said, while earlier people were individually participating, collaborating in different research activities there, when CERN decided to set up this Large Hadron Collider in this tunnel, it was a big project. I think it was a few $billion project involving a large number of countries and hundreds of researchers. And so they were seeking in-kind contribution from different countries. And India also was a participant making in-kind contribution. And while we did make our contribution in some high-tech areas like superconductive magnets, like cryogenic equipment, fast electronics, some precision mechanical equipment, also grid computing software. So there are several areas where India contributed, and recognized these were all technologically top of the line activities. And here we had a chance to do this on a large scale, involving, in fact, Indian industries in most of the cases. So the point was that India contributed to CERN, but India also benefited a lot. And even more importantly, CERN accepted these contributions with an evaluation done at European costs. And you do high-tech things in India, they are actually much cheaper. And so we were actually get recognition for a much higher cost, and it was agreed that the equivalent of the contribution made by India, half of it would be put in India Fund at CERN, which was to be used for the scientists visiting from India to CERN. So for India, it's a very beneficial arrangement. I think I have not seen such an arrangement in any other collaboration. Simultaneously, I think the relationship between India and CERN were moving from strength to strength. And we all felt that we should, in some manner, express our gratitude by way of making a good present. And so I put this proposal to the Director General of CERN, and they very graciously accepted that. And so then there was a question of what should be that present, and we couldn't have anything better than the statue of Nataraja, which has very strong metaphoric connections, as has been explained, and maybe we can talk about that later. So they were very happy, we were very happy, and so this was actually got done and transported and installed there. And I think, for them as well as for us, it was a presentation of a piece of art. And we always look for significance. Why a particular piece of art? And I felt looking at the programs that have been going on at CERN, Nataraja was the best selection. And now that I'm finding so much of interest, that actually bears it out.
Okay. We have seen pictures of you along with that sculpture, and as Ranjanaji explained, on June 18, 2004. And we have also seen pictures of that particular statue casting a shade. It is a night picture, and it is available in all our social media in different formats. So what was our expectation when we presented it to them, that how they will receive it, and were we expecting this kind of, where it was placed in that CERN complex, and were we expecting this kind of a reception to this particular piece of art?
No, frankly, this was no surprise that they received it so well, because after all, presenting pieces of art is a very common thing. We also have, for example, a plaque depicting images from, I think, don't remember, but Ramayana or Mahabharata, I think, which were placed in the main kind of conference hall of International Atomic Energy Agency, right in the auditorium, when in full view of all participants who would be present in that hall. And of course, now the place has changed, so I don't know, but it was there for decades. We have, of course, we have a bust of Dr. Homi Bhabha, which was presented to IAEA, which is sitting just outside the IAEA conference hall. Our own TIFR, for example, has a very significant collection of pieces of art. So this is a natural thing to be expected. And they have, of course, see this one has a big image, 2-meter tall statue. I'm not 100% sure. Dr. Srinivasan can clarify on that, but it is about, I'm not saying the tallest, but it is about the tallest Nataraja in the world. And so it required a little open space. So it was placed in a kind of open space between the two buildings, as Ranjanaji mentioned, close to the main building, because you require that kind of space for display of such a piece.
Okay. Sharadaji, Nataraja has captured the imagination of many generations and over centuries. And today, actually, we are on the same date, June 18. We have this image of Nataraja near to the main building at CERN also. And how, as you were a student of here engineering physics in Mumbai IIT, then went on to study archaeology, and ultimately became an archaeometallurgist. How did your journey of your research into these various aspects of Nataraja start?
First of all, let me say that it's... Yes, can you hear me? Thank you. First of all, let me say that it's a great privilege.
Yes.
You can hear? Yeah. It's a great privilege to be on this program.
Yes.
And thank you very much. And hello very nice to see Professor Kakodkar, and greetings to Dr. Pai and Dr. Ranjana. Well, I should say that for me, in a way, well, it's great to have to share this conversation also with Dr. Kakodkar, because the entire atomic energy community has also been one of my personal big inspirations, because my father was also has also been very prominently in the area of nuclear energy and so on. And when I was young, of course, I used to get taken to some of the, the upcoming nuclear installations. And so I already had this fascination and understanding of the potential of using uranium and thorium and the processes of fission and fusion. And of course, that's how I got interested really in doing physics and, quantum mechanics and all that was what I was actually interested in. But I also had a lot of very artistic interest because I was also a Bharatanatyam dancer. And I think, every Bharatanatyam dancer begins their repertoire with this verse about Angikam Bhuvanam Yasya, and, the Aharyam is the Chandra Taradi and so on. So the nuances of, Shiva Nataraja also inspires us as dancers. And we have the form of Nataraja also in front of us as dance. So I got interested in trying to look at how. Yes. Yes. I got interested.
Now we can hear it at this position. Otherwise.
Oh, at this position. Okay. Is this better? Yeah.
Yeah.
Is this better?
Yeah.
Okay. So, well, I won't move around much then. So I was interested then in seeing how the science and technology could help us actually study archaeological artifacts better. How the history of technology can help us to understand better some of the problems in art and archaeology. And one of the aspects that I did study when I was, got into archaeological science was because, there are so many images of South Indian bronzes and Chola bronzes which have been cast over time. And quite often, it's not very easy to date and authenticate them and so on. And hence to try and look at how the chemical profile can help in better dating them. And so that's why, in fact, I'd used one of the techniques, lead isotope analysis, which actually relates to the uranium thorium, cycle and so on, to actually try and figure out means to, tell apart Pallava bronzes from Chola bronzes and so on. And of course, from the technical side, there were some very interesting findings, one of which was that the Nataraja bronze itself might have already been formulated by the Pallava period preceding the Chola period. And of course, it's a great coming to the topic of it as a gift, because it's not only a very great artistic work, but there's a lot of technological prowess in the creation of the image. And also, it is a great contribution in terms of the history of ideas, with implications for history and philosophy of science, which was, I think, brought first to our attention by Ananda Kumaraswamy, who himself was a Renaissance personality. So I think these aspects were captured in the Nataraja bronze in the era preceding the Renaissance. And Ananda Kumaraswamy, of course, quoting from Shaiva Siddhantic texts, he talked about how the image seemed to balance Srishti, which is creation, and Samhara, which is destruction. And, he talks about the Prabhavali representing the cosmic cycles, and how, he described it as poetry, but nonetheless science. Of course, the image probably had different resonances over different periods. And so I would say, to use the word science may be too strong, but perhaps the word prescience, which is like a certain premonition of, scientific ideas to come, which was what perhaps Carl Sagan was inspired to say about the image. So those aspects also did, of course, interest me. And then I also got interested in looking at whether, this description of cosmic dance, which is attributed to the Nataraja, which I think came up perhaps to some extent in the writing of Kumaraswamy. And that was one of the big became so popular and was collected so much in the West, definitely because it had this kind of appeal to the scientific temperament, whether or not how far that was justified. But also I was interested in the idea, presented by some of the rituals and so on, the observances being linked to actual observances of celestial phenomena. And for instance, the Nataraja bronze, which is worshipped in Chidambaram, it's worshipped both in the anthropomorphic form as the, bronze icon. And there is also a space next to it, which used to be left empty, which was described as the Chidambaram Rahasya, where the Nataraja bronze is, depicted as the Akasha Lingam, or the formless, aspect of Shiva Nataraja. And also there is a particular festival in Chidambaram which takes place in the month of December, which is called Arudra Darshanam, where the constellation Orion appears right on the zenith, right on top of the temple. And there is, of course, there were all these connections of nakshatras and so on with various religious aspects and phenomena. And so the Arudra actually refers to the star Betelgeuse, which is in the constellation Orion, and that is connected also to Shiva Nataraja in this form. So this Arudra Tandava Darshanam, which is observed in the month of December, is related to this linkage of the dance of Shiva with the constellation Orion as it's observed at that time. So there are these various connections which I've published a lot about, but I will leave you to ask some more questions. Or shall I carry on in this vein, a bit more on the archaeoastronomical?
Yeah, you can carry on, please. Yeah, actually, I had last year I had the fortune of going to Chidambaram, and also in the morning during that puja, that transition was actually magical. It started very subtly, the drums, the music, the bells, and the arati, and then it moved, and ultimately it reached a crescendo. And at that moment, there was so much of energy we could feel, and at the same time, a very magical silence or peace inside. So I was about to ask you about a little bit more about the concept of Nataraja Murti in Chidambaram as well as Akasha Lingam. So how do these complement each other, these two concepts?
Yes, well, interestingly, usually in many Shiva temples in the Chola region and in South India and so on, according to Agamic tradition, it is actually the formless, the lingam, the cosmic pillar, or whatever we might describe it, which is actually worshipped in the sanctum. And the Utsava Murti, which is the festival icons, which, so all these images which were cast by the Cholas, the festival icons, were meant to be really being taken out in procession. But Chidambaram is the only temple where the Nataraja icon itself is worshipped in the main innermost sanctum in the Garbhagriha. So that is also because of the fact that, Shiva Nataraja, of course, is also connected to the 5 elements. So that's why when I was studying, the elements of copper, tin, bronze, and so on, and the composition of bronze alloys, he's also associated with the Panchabhuta, which is, of course, earth, wind, fire, water, and Akasha. And you see also various facets of these coming up in the imagery of Nataraja itself. You have the image of Ganga and the locks, and then you have the crescent moon also. So Ganga is the water, and the moon is representative of again, the sky. And then you have also fire or Samhara, one more element. And the leg below which you have the dwarf demon Apasmara or Muyalagan, is also referring to earth. And you also have one hand pointing to that, and, with the Abhaya Mudra. But also when you, and the other, when you talk about it, yes, during the Aarti, there's also this very beautiful aspect of the ritual which you can only see. And, it's something which just stays in your mind when they bring out the ruby lingam, for the Arudra Darshanam. And it is a ruby, the Nataraja Murti in the ruby. And then you see the fire through it, and it just lights up, and it's just the most, I don't know, one of those really, as you say, one of those experiences that really have this quality of something which lifts you out of the mundane to the sublime, so to speak. But also coming to this representation, as I said, which it's also interesting that the Chola version of the Nataraja with the lifted leg is something which is quite distinctive to the Tamil region, it seems, because earlier to that, you see other forms of Nataraja, for instance, in Badami, and which is the Chatura Tandava, which is a slightly different depiction of the dancing pose. But in the Tamil version and what is worshipped in Chidambaram, it is with the leg is lifted in what we describe as the Bhujanga Trasita Karana, which is one of the karanas or the dance postures that Tandu, spoke about the karanas to Bharata and so on. This is one of those karanas. And the Bhujanga Trasita, so that lifted leg depiction you only see in the Nataraja bronze. And since I was talking about this connection to the constellation Orion, for instance, the star Betelgeuse falls on the shoulder, and then you have Bellatrix, and then you have the belt of Orion, which sort of aligns along the waist of the Nataraja. And then this was a study that I also did with the late astrophysicist Dr. Nirupama Raghavan, where we were trying to see whether this Arudra Tandava had a more literal association with the iconography of Nataraja. And you see that the lifted leg actually seems to be pointing towards Sirius. And also Muyalagan in Tamil actually means the hair. In Sanskrit, it is called apasmara, which is also maybe ignorance or stuttering and stammering. So it's the dance of Shiva overcoming the one who is struggling for speech and so on, associated with the demon. But Muyalagan also means hair, and so you have the constellation Lepus, Lepus is also the Greek word for hair, which appears just below the Orion constellation. So again, there seems to be some kind of link here with constellations, and these were, of course, common themes, perhaps running across some early mythologies, because Rudra is also associated with a hunter, and in Greek mythology also Orion is related to a hunter. And even the lifting of the leg towards Sirius, the dog star, who's also described as Mridavadya. There are also some other reliefs which other scholars have also pointed to. For instance, in the Pallava period, the Gangadhara, again, this connection of, and even that pose in which the Gangadhara image is, it also could, there are some links also with some of the Greek representations of Orion, which has the leg, the knee lifted up. But this distinctive pose of the leg going towards the star Sirius, I think, is very typical of Nataraja. And so that's also could have some connection with this observation of cosmic phenomena. And there is also, which I've written about, but I would probably like to study it a bit more to be very definitive about it. The question has also been raised because one of the very prominent celestial phenomena which took place around the time these images were made, and which the Chinese astronomers also documented, was the Crab supernova explosion, which took place in 1054 and on the 4th of July and so on. And it's so, it has, probably the question can be raised, that was this, was it or was it not documented that much in India? And so in that sense, it's interesting that there is, suddenly in the 11th century, mid-11th century, there is an inscription which comes up. And, there are two of these major festivals which take place in Chidambaram. One is the Brahmotsavam, which takes place in December, related to the Arudra Tandava Darshanam, where the moon is full in the lunar asterism of, as I mentioned, of Tiruvadirai. But there is also this, which takes place in July, where the moon is full in the lunar asterism of Uttara Nakshatram. And so the study that we've done with Dr. Nirupama Raghavan suggested that, in fact, when the moon was full in that particular nakshatra, actually falls on the 11th of July, which is a bit close to when the Crab supernova explosion takes place. And so it's possible that mid-11th century inscription of Ani Tirumanjaram, which is now celebrated every year in Chidambaram, we can't say it's still at a speculation stage, might have been related to the Crab explosion, which would have been as bright as the sun and so on. So these are some ideas, of course, and it's a question of further explorations and things like that. And also, I suppose, there is also a lot of the devotional poetry, which I suppose has to be studied and explored further. But certainly, some of the devotional poetry, of course, you can see some elements where there is some kind of sensibility, at least towards, for instance, there's also, according to the legend of Chidambaram, it is the first sighting of the Ananda Tandava is supposed to be, is connected with Arudra Darshanam. David Smith has also written that in his book. So there is this sort of way of, some reason for which this dance is, related to this, celestial phenomena observation. And of course, the Ananda Tandava itself, it's a very beautiful a theme where it basically describes the dance of furious bliss, as we might describe it, because the Tandava is in one sense a very destructive dance, whereas Ananda is a very blissful notion. And so that's why when you see this image, it's at the center of it, it has got a very sort of serene kind of look about it. And, there is also this Pallava, because this idea that the image could have been formulated in the Pallava period, there is one frieze in Siyamangalam in, a 7th century Pallava frieze where you see the leg lifted in this Bhujangatrasita Karna and along with a serpent and so on. So it brings together all these, maybe different kinds of aspects, mundane aspects, but, slightly more mystical aspects. And of course, some of the, poetry of the Shaivite saints, they do bring out a different connotation also sometimes, where Shiva is, depicted as wandering through cremation grounds and dancing like a madman. So this sense of maybe, of death and destruction on the one hand, but there's also this other connotations which come out, for instance, which are more mystical. And for instance, a 9th century poet saint, Manikavachakar, so he says, Adiyam Antamam Illadavar, Mundiya Mudal, Nadu Iridiyam Anai. So, there clearly he's saying the one who is without beginning and without end, and the one who is, what went before and what is to come, and the middle, and so on. So this sense of kind of connecting with something which is larger and more infinite. And he also sings about the Kutan dancing, creating, destroying this heaven, earth, and all else. And Appar also, just says at some point that, that the Kutan should fill you with sky or nilavu to make you be. So the sense of, in a way, connecting with the cosmic. And some of these Shaiva Siddhanta saints, of course, there were all these maybe tantric aspects and all, but they were themselves also performers and dancers. So it's a lived experience. And that's why I think that, when you dance, then you do get the sense of how you transcend something. It's a different kind of yoga. Maybe you're reaching for something else, and the sense of sublimation and, reaching for the skies. That's, I think, a very human, aspect. And I think, like with all, ancient cultures, is probably, whether you look at Egyptians or the Greeks, there seems to be some mix of elements of the rational with the irrational, with so on and the other. All of these, in a way, they coexist and they all, intermingle, and, the Greeks also, when you think about it, I mean, they were believing in eternity or whatever, but there was such great material scientists and, likewise. So it's not that all of it necessarily has to be taken at face value, but there are some elements there which I think make for interesting connections in terms of history of science and so on. Anyway, sorry, I've been going on and on.
Thank you.
Would you like to?
Kakotkarji, now Shardaji talked about the metallurgical aspects also of this. I will ask her about it again. Where was this statue? You said it is one of the biggest statues in the world of Nataraja. Where was it made? And what are the unique aspects of that? How long did it take in making?
See, when it was decided that we will get a Nataraja done and present it to CERN, obviously we had to, there are traditional schools where there are this work sculptures and making of bronzes goes on at different locations. So we actually entrusted this job to Dr. Baldev Raj and his colleagues at Indira Gandhi Center, and also at DAE we had one joint secretary by name Mrs. Sudha Bhave. So these are the people who kind of decided to take up this project. They sort of did scouting around, and finally they decided that this should be done at Swami Malai, and the artist was Mr. Rajan Sthapati, and he sort of agreed that yes, he would prepare, make this Nataraja for us. We also decided that this will be done in an absolutely traditional style, the lost wax process, as has been practiced for these bronzes. But while this is there, the people from Indira Gandhi Center, they of course were looking at it from the scientific and engineering eyes. I think they also did fair bit of work in terms of looking at quality of different processes. So it was, I think, a curious combination of modern scientists and technologists who were actually playing a secondary role, I would say, and the primary work done in an absolutely traditional manner. So much so, when there was time to kind of take this statue to Geneva, CERN, we actually made arrangements for these artists and some of their support colleagues to also go there and help in erection of this statue. This whole process took around 8 months at that time, and I think it was done. I don't know what it is called when these artists do this, but I would say it was done in a very professional manner.
Sharadaji, you talked about different types of Nataraja depicted in Chola and Pallava period. So how this process, this imagery has evolved, and also the metallurgical process as a metallurgist, how this has emerged and evolved, and what are the different types of technologies these people use. As Anilji talked about, it was a very unique combination of scientists, technocrats, as well as our artisans, traditional artisans. But this technique has evolved around through centuries. And what was the process, and how good is the process, or how can we look at it today from a point of view of a metallurgist who has gone through advanced training?
Yes, well, it's one of the most remarkable examples of handcrafting. But in modern technology terms, it would be what we would call investment casting. Of course, it's a very old tradition in the Indian subcontinent. We have the celebrated Mohenjo-daro dancing girl, which is a very small example though. But what is also remarkable about the Chola bronzes and the South Indian bronzes is that they're all solid cast. So they're all, and this is also something, since Dr. Kakodkarji mentioned Dr. Baldev Raj, who was also eventually then also NIAS director. So a long time ago, when I was starting my PhD work in it, I had gone to IGCAR, and we actually did the radiography of these images, which were brought, a few of them were brought all the way from Government Museum, Chennai. I think it was in 1990. And the radiograph showed that, the casting was very well done, and there were really no flaws and so on. And one of the interesting aspects is that the sacred geometry of the Nataraja itself is done with the idea of facilitating the casting, because, metal doesn't flow terribly well because it's a bit viscous. And these were made typically of bronze, which is, leaded tin bronze, or sometimes with brass, but basically copper alloys. And of course, what I found from the Chola period is, of course, they are mainly bronze with about 7% tin or so, 7% tin, 7% lead. But to facilitate the flowing, it's almost as if this geometry of the Nataraja to devise such a large casting, a large solid casting, so that Prabhavali and the sash and the all of the arms being connected to the aureole, all of that actually facilitate the casting. So they sort of integrated the design elements with the casting as well, which is quite interesting. And if you look at the understanding of the sthapatis and so on, the acharyas and sthapatis, of course, that is again something that I've also been trying to document, because those are all very rich oral traditions and intangible heritage traditions, which are passing away. And in fact, it was Ganapati Sthapati of Mahabalipuram who, in his book, he mentioned also that the Nataraja figure should be formulated within the star positions of Orion. He's commented about that as well. And even, for instance, Radha Krishna Sthapati, when I had interviewed him and so on, so he talks about the Virinda Sharai, how the Jarai should be depicted, sort of flying locks and things like that. So, their understanding of the iconometry and the iconographic aspects also has informed it over time. So that's also a very rich intangible heritage, really. And one thing I would say, though, that a lot of people do call them Panchaloha, which is 5 metal, but they're not actually literally 5 metal, as in with a lot of alloyed composition of 5 metals in that way, but they're mainly leaded bronzes or leaded brasses, and perhaps a little bit of very just traces gold and silver may be added more for shastric purposes, because sometimes you often find that some of the reasons why people, in fact, they may be treasure hunters going after the icons because they think that there's a lot of silver or gold in them. And also, I think they need to be also informed that analysis shows that they were basically copper alloys in the main. And, these traces, even if you added in a 200 kg icon, if you added a trace of gold or silver, it's only going to be a really very trace proportion. So that's not a reason to spirit them away, so to speak. And that's also one of the problems, that is. So.
And how about the evolution of this imagery? Like, what was it conceptualized in the beginning itself as this, or it has evolved? What do you think about? Like different periods, like Pallava, Chola, later on Vijayanagara. Has there been an evolution that you can see, and who are the people who have, propagated this Nataraja imagery especially in, I think, Tamil Nadu and some parts of Karnataka. But today it has come across the world.
Yes, of course. So, of course, we have the spectacular example of the Badami, the stone sculpture, the Chalukyas, who, and it's a 18-armed sculpture there, in each mudra is beautifully depicted and so on. So that is a very wonderful depiction in stone. And then, as I was saying, that the technical analysis points to the fact that there were already a couple of the Nataraja image with the leg in Bhujangatrasita Karana already by the Pallava period. So in the Pallava period, you also have the other poses of Nataraja, the Urdhva Janu, which is a leg lifted in a slightly different pose from the Bhujangatrasita and so on. And it was the lead isotope analysis and so on which actually showed this, because the isotopic ratios of lead, because they tend to be characteristic for different sources of metal. So if there is a clustering, it can be related to, the fact that different metal was used from different sources. So that was how I was used to distinguish between, say, the Nataraja images of the Pallava, Chola, and Vijayanagara period, as you say. And it's interesting that actually most of the Nataraja icons were really cast in the Chola period, and the Vijayanagara period, not that many. And also there was, of course, a cultic shift, because they, I think, were more Vaishnavite worshippers and so on by then. So that it really seems to have been an efflorescence which was associated with Shaivite and Shaiva Siddhanta worship in the Chola period. And it's also interesting also because in stone, it appears that this image really comes into vogue due to the patronage of the Chola queen, Sembian Mahadevi. She was a widowed queen and queen of Gandharaditya Chola. Gandharaditya Chola fasted unto death as a devotee of Shiva. And then she's, of course, she had been already, there are numerous, temples that she had built and so on. But it's very interesting that she built a commemorative temple as well at Koneri Rajapuram. And there's also a plaque where she depicts Gandharaditya Chola worshipping a Shivalingam. And a lot of the Nataraja images start appearing in stone temples with the patronage of Sembian Mahadevi. And so it's almost, it's a very marked kind of shift there. And so obviously the interest and the eclectic vision and so on of the queen must have had a role to play in all of this artistic efflorescence. And I suppose, it's that's an endless ocean really for a researcher, because there is so much to. And the other thing that I'm quite fascinated by, because in the Pallava period, as we talked about Manika Vachakar and so on, but in the 7th century, you do have Shankara is also playing a role in Kanchipuram and so on. So, and then of course in the later period, maybe by about the 13th century and so on, you do see a lot of the the Shaiva Siddhantic texts in Tamil and so on, which seem to have some kind of influence of Advaitic philosophy as well, because there is also Umapati of Shivacharya of Chidambaram, who talks about Sachidananda and so on. The connection between Chit, which is the mind, and Ananda and so on. And also then the term Chidambaram itself. One reading into it is that it means Chit plus Ambaram, which is Chit is the mind and Ambaram is the cosmos. So in a way, this link between the cosmic consciousness or whatever, that does resonate, at least it comes to mind. But of course, the Tamil word for it earlier was Tillai or Sittambalam, which was the little hall. So whether it was actually just that the Tamil words got Sanskritized. But even so, when you look at some of the poetry of Manika Vachakar already, it's very mystical in some ways. And he sings of, Oru Unaradu. The Unaradu is also to comprehend, the comprehension, which is again, the mind, and it comes into being the cosmic, comprehension. So these kinds of elements of connecting the mind, the inner space and the outer space and the cosmos and all of these, some of these, it's just very fascinating in terms of history of ideas that all of these thoughts, do seem to come into play when we get more into some of these aspects.
So you now talked about the inner space and outer space, and also the cosmological, the cosmic aspect of it. So does it, see, this is happening in the 7th century, centuries behind, or almost millennia, we can say. So how the people who envisioned this kind of an imagery and this kind of thoughts, how they would have arrived at these thoughts? And also, are these thoughts having any similarity with, like, the cosmological theory of Carl Sagan? And you mentioned about Arvind Kumaraswamy also. Today's scientific advantages, like at CERN, we are looking at the very creation of it is called the God's particle, and how it gives shape to the whole world. That is, we are going into the fundamentals of creation. We want to know through scientific experiments. And to some extent, these, as you mentioned about Manikya Vachakar and all that, about a kind of a consciousness and how that gives shape to matter. Do you see any?
Well, yes, this is the great enigma, whether these were more intuitive ideas and I think it was really Carl Sagan who touched upon it very beautifully, where he said that, certainly when you compare it with other pre-modern cultures, there was already some sort of notion of these, cycles, in a way, a more cyclical view of creation and destruction, whereas, as you were saying, in many other cultures, they were not willing to divest themselves of the view of, as he put it, that the universe may have been more than 1,000 years old. And he talks about the Hindus and the Mayans having these notions of, thinking in terms of very large numbers and billions and so on. One aspect could be is that, I think that with ancient cultures all over, the connections between their existing, call it scientific understanding, and their, ritualistic or religious understanding would not have been such a fine separation as is now. To have all been a little bit intertwined, or one getting mixed up in the other. For instance, one of the reasons for wanting to, as we know, they kept track of the eclipses and all. The reason was actually maybe more ritualistic, because, of all of these things which should be do's and don'ts and all that, but they still kept track of all of these and all. So they may have been actually, and there has been, of course, some, whether, it's Aryabhatta, and whether he also, had these very large numbers when he was looking at and so on, some of the mathematics and such like. So perhaps there was more of, and also the thing is also the star positions and also were also being observed for navigation, because across cultures, whether it was in the Arab world or in Egypt and so on, they would be observing the rising of certain stars, such as and I think in India also, for instance, in January when Bellatrix and Sirius, when they rise. And sometimes those are connected with their understandings of when monsoons and all that come into play. So there would have been, I think it was more a holistic, so there have been a lot of things in play where they would have been perhaps keeping track of some of these things. And then some of it also entered into the artistic depictions, or the way the wonder of it and so on, I think, which is a very natural human impulse and so on. So it's I think, needs to be seen in a more holistic way, perhaps. And but it's a very beautiful, idea that which does and this give you a sense of transcendence as well. Whether you, I mean, I think you experience it much more profoundly as a dancer, but even intellectually, these are very. I think they deserve a special place in terms of the history of ideas of the world, which is what I think we would be interested to think about as keep in mind as scientists. So.
Ranjanaji, I think you want to ask some question to Anil Kakutkarji regarding some aspects of this, some scientific.
Yeah. When we say that Nataraja in the CERN, many atheists may be in total disagreement with the idea of placing a religious statue, religious idol, a symbol at CERN, which is a place full of people with practical intellect. So, and at the same time, there are scientists like Capra and Carl Sagan, and who are driving a metaphor between dance of Shiva and dance of subatomic particles. So these are thoughts of very high order thinking and deep philosophy involved. You, as a physicist, how will you perceive this metaphor, which a common man can understand in a simple way? So I would like to have your views on this metaphor between dance of Shiva and dance of subatomic particles. How do you perceive it?
You're asking me?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. In between, I lost the sound.
Okay.
So I heard only part of it, but I heard good part of it. So I figure out what you're asking. You see, after all, human beings are thinking animals. And in India, we have a very kind of long knowledge tradition. And there are, well, that has been our strength on the basis of deep thinking. Our kind of sages have reached various conclusions. And we find a lot of similarities between them and what the modern science or modern physics now tells us. Not that there is 100% similarity, not also that in everywhere we are able to find that similarity, but there are these similarities. And and that's something, I think, an important part of heritage, our heritage. but I would not directly connect the two. There are, for example, in every subject, whether it is mathematics, whether it is astronomy, whether it is the more philosophical things like cosmic dance and so on and so forth. These, to my mind, must have arisen out of the deep thinking, well, partly observing things around whatever they could observe, and going into a deep thought and imagining things. And it's amazing how they could reach many of the conclusions which are fairly close to what we see today. Now, talking about the dance of Shiva, I think for example, we know subatomic particles. There are always this continuous energy transitions. They move from one state to another state. So there's actually this energy dance which is going on in these particles. Obviously, they are so small, we can't see them with our eyes. We can only sense them using a variety of detectors. But there is a way of picturizing this, and now we feel that, well, this is what must happen. So some of these connections we have made, whether they're actually there or not, certainly more thought has to go in. But I think it's very interesting that we can, and this even during science, you have there are many things where you carry out research purely using experimental means. There are some who go through predictions, of course, based on very sound theories. But there are also conjectures which later on they prove and then say that what I conjectured was right. So I think this is the path of science, and at this stage of our understanding, I would only want to appreciate the similarities that exist and appreciate with great, what shall I say, awe and respect to our great thinkers of past who could come so close to these visualizations, as it were. But I'll leave it at that.
Thank you very much. Thank you. In a very interesting manner, you draw the metaphor. Yeah.
And Sharadaji, as a dancer, I think Ranjanaji also wants to ask you one more question about.
Though she explained quite a bit. Whenever we talk of Shiva's dance, the picture which crosses our mind is that of Tandava. That is Raudra Roop. But as you said, like there is a Saumya Roop also of Tandava. But why that is not so popular, or why it's not that so, prominent? Why don't people connect Tandava always with anger or that one? So you give the very nice concept of the Saumya Roop. So I would like to have your views, because he's Nataraja, the king of dance. And the dance has all the expressions. It's not only like the Raudra Roop. So I would like to know about why this is so. And then also in the sculptures, if we look at the different many temples, which one you find the more and the reason?
Well, when it comes to the bronze depiction, I feel there that the technology might also be driving the form that we actually see, because this form that they had arrived at actually is very ergonomically viable, because with such a large, amount of metal, it also has to balance, and so on. Otherwise, and, there are problems, in fact, with materiality. Stone doesn't have that much of tensile strength. And you actually see that in some of the Chola sculptures. For instance, at Gangaikonda Chorapuram, there's a very beautiful Nataraja image with the leg lifted. But below the leg, you'll see they've had to prop the leg up with a strut, because of the fact that the leg would have been breaking, or maybe they've observed it breaking, because granite doesn't have that kind of tensile strength of metal. So in a way, this particular form, I think, because of the fact that they were able to show that the ring of fire, or the whatever, the ring of the cosmic cycles and so on, and the way it was able to act as a balancer for this form, I think it would have made it also something which, being easier to cast, also would have had an aspect to add to the popularity. Of course, some historians have also said that that circular form, it also brings to the mind, I think it was Padma Kaimal who wrote that, the Chakravartin, the idea of divine kingship, which was also very important to the Cholas, and so it starts being more prominently seen. And you also see it on the sculpture and things like that. So that could be one aspect as well, that the materiality has a role to play. And then in fact, even the ring, because again, bronze, although it has fairly decent tensile strength, it's not it can have problems. And then in some of the Natarajas which are damaged, you see that there's an iron armature inside it. So they were adapting also the technology as they went along, or rather meeting the technical challenges in their depiction. So it's a mix of all that. And also then the geometry of the sacred geometry of the six-sided star, the Satkuna, that is also something that you see in the Nataraja image, that it is also like a Sri Chakra and so on. So there are many of these aspects which perhaps it was a mix of, of course, the various kinds of ideas and facets they were trying to convey, and the technical possibilities of materials and so on. So
I think it has been a... Yeah, tell me. Yeah. Sharadaji, you want to say something? Yeah.
What more can I say except to say that it is, I think it is something, it was a problem that found me in a way, like, you see when you read Manika Vachakar, he sings about how, he entered my agam and became my Lord. The agam is the inner self. And, this also has these echoes with Tamil Sangam poetry, where the agam is the inner self and the puram is the outer self. And, that's also been written about some historians, because you have the inner space, the Garbhagriha, and the puram, the outer space. So he sings about how he enters, the agam and became my Lord. So sometimes you almost feel that something sort of almost, even in science, sometimes you find that, yes, this happens, you conjecture, and then it sort of comes to be. And so for me as well, there was a strong feeling perhaps that I wanted to apply, my scientific mind to this. I don't know where that came from. So sometimes it's good to follow our heart, even when it comes to scientific aspects. And then I think out of it, some good research and good findings do come. I suppose I would end on that note. So thank you very much again for this wonderful opportunity, and wonderful to be in conversation with all of you, and Dr. Kakodkar and Dr. Pai for drawing out.
Thank you so very much.
It has been a wonderful journey, and it has opened up a lot of windows. Actually, because Kakodkarji had, and all his colleagues took that decision of gifting a sculpture of Nataraja to CERN. Today, after 1.5 decades, we are going on exploring into this very magical or mystical and more probably much more deeper exploring into these similarities and other aspects of this particular tradition of arts, science, and spirituality. And
dance, because ultimately Manika Vachakar says, he entered my agam and caused me to dance. That is the result. The dynamic motion of the particles is caused by, and how we try and understand it. Yes, yes, of course.
Actually,
but it's great to enjoy these metaphors. So
this passion is very visible.
Well, let me.
Anilji.
I have not dwelt any bit in the field of arts, but what I know is the classical Indian dance form. Of course, it's an expression of art, but there are people who have done a lot of research into the relationship between these different movements that one goes through while performing a dance, and its effect on the human body, human wellness. And so you can actually connect yoga on one side, classical Indian dance in between, human wellness on the other side, and the modern science of kinetic, some word, but that's an entire discipline of science, which and there are colleagues.
Hello, 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 hello. Anil ji,
No, I think we've lost him.
I
Well, I
think
should
we have
add
lost.
also that, yeah, well, as an archaeometallurgist, I think also what is amazing is that how much science, the better the science is, the more we learn, not just about the present, but also the past. I mean, even the use of, the age, the lead isotope ratio analysis, which is used to understand the age of rock and so on, that actually being used to look at, the differences in the dating of metal artifacts in a way, relative dating and so on, using the calibration and profile. So it's really fantastic. The more we do good science, the more it tells us, not only about the present and, about the past and so on. So that is also, I think, the work I've done is also a great tribute to science, I would say, in the end. So thank you.
And now we are almost out of time. Ranjana ji, I think.
May I
Vote of
request
thanks.
Suman? May I request Suman Ray?
Thank you, ma'am. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, Suman, we can.
Thank you, ma'am.
And yes, I should add that also, since we're talking about CERN, that actually it was mass spectroscopy, which we use in lead isotope analysis, where the mass spectra of different, elements are measured, and that's how you can decide how much, what are the quantities, and what are the trace elements, and so on. So it's back to, the subatomic particles, really. So, thank you for the intervention.
Thank you.
Over to you.
Yes, Suman.
Yes, ma'am. Respected Director, Madam Professor Ranjana Agrawal, respected Sri Jain Sahasrapute, National Organizing Secretary Vijnana Bharti, our distinguished guest speakers involved in the dialogue exchange program of this day, Dr. Anil Kapotkar, former Director BARC, former Chairman of Atomic Energy Commission of India and Secretary to the Government of India, Dr. Sharda Srinivasan, Professor at National Institute of Advanced Studies, Bangalore, Honorable Coordinator of this Dialogue Exchange Program, Shri Vivekanand Pai, Secretary Vijay Bharati, my dear colleagues, all the participants of this webinar, it is a great honor to propose the vote of thanks on this occasion. The 18th June, as Professor Ranjana Agrawal has already described, which is a very significant in our recent history, as the way this was the day in 2004 that a 2-meter tall bronze statue, Nataraja, a gift from Government of India, was unveiled at CERN. And Madam has already talked the science behind the dancing Shiva, the Nataraja. First of all, I would like to propose my hearty vote of thanks to Madam Stats, Professor Ranjana Agrawal, for gracing today's event. Thank you, ma'am, for your interesting and thought-provoking address, making this dialogue a very interesting and successful program. I'm pleased to thank our distinguished guest speakers involved in the Dialogue Exchange program, Dr. Anil Kapotkar, who has very beautifully described on the thinking process. He has talked about the story on Indian program at CERN research right from early 60s, and he has talked about the importance of Nataraja, the expectations, and the cosmics behind his dancing Shiva, and he also talked where it was made and making bronzes and curious combinations of, we talked about curious combinations of modern scientists and technology with traditional aspect at the primary level. And thank you, sir. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you, Dr. Shanda Srinivasan. He is a great professor as well as a great dancer. So it was very pleasant to hear you, ma'am. So much connected to Nataraja. You have so beautifully talked about different images of Nataraja, different poses, the poses of Nataraja. I mean, you have not left anything that was, you have talked about inspiration from Nataraja that we can get from how technology can help us to understand the art and archaeology, so many bronzes images. You have talked how the chemical process, the technology behind it, and also you have talked about the Chitambram Rahasya, the festival in Chitambram, and you have really made this dialogue exchange program a very interesting and very meaningful way. And you have really enlightened us with your both the expertise in dance as well as science. So for making this whole dialogue process exchange program very successful and meaningful, which was really interesting. And I would like to express my gratitude to our honorable coordinator for this dialogue exchange program, Shri Vivekanand Pai, who has really connected us together through a series of questions and enlightened us. And I would like to express our profound gratitude to Shri Prasad Vijayana Bharti for being very proactive in this event. I'm very grateful to my co-coordinators, Dr. Reza, who is Chief Scientist at NISTES, for great cooperation and support. Got the opportunity to learn during this, during this coordination of this program. Thank you, Dr. Nisha, Scientist at NISTES, who has been running on and on to make this webinar a great success. My sincere thanks to our head IT infrastructure media, Mr. Avinash Chedis, for all kind of cooperation we needed. I'm very happy to express a vote of thanks to our colleagues and all the participants for their patience and providing their valuable time, without which this event would not have been meaningful. Thank you to all who have helped us in making this webinar on Nataraja, a conference of arts and science, a resounding success. And yes, as Professor Shanda has described both the aspect of Nataraja, the destructive, and as well as the creative part. So I hope our young minds move towards the other part of Nataraja, that is the creation, that is the common form of dance known as Lasya, which represents the creation. So thank you so much to all, and thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Professor
Thank you.
Shanda. Thank you, Dr. Kakodkar. Thank you, Vivekanand ji. Thanks, Suman.
Thank you.
Thank you.